Historically, Germany's economy has always been the powerhouse of Europe, but currently it is going through a rough patch. Last year it shrank 0.3% as it struggled with issues like more expensive energy, lack of skilled labour, high interest rates, and homegrown budget crises. The signs do not look to have improved this year. On the contrary, it seems like the economy has entered another challenging year of stagnation and turbulence. Moritz Kraemer, the chief economist at Landesbank Baden-Württemberg, put it more pointedly in a recent TV interview about quarterly figures. I don't want to argue about whether it's plus 0.2% or minus 0.2%, the fact is we are stagnating. Kraemer compared the ongoing sluggish growth of the German economy to the waves of a corrugated sheet of metal. We are moving in a kind of corrugated economy. It goes up and down a little bit, but actually we are lying flat on the ground. On their own part, the Central Bank of Germany, the Deutsche Bundesbank, while looking forward to expectations for the current quarter, said in its monthly report that stress factors would probably remain in the first quarter, which would mean economic output could therefore decline again slightly in the first quarter of 2024.
Germany's industrial production unexpectedly declined in November as manufacturing woes in Europe's largest economy.
Well, the German economy shrank over last year. That's according to fresh government data.
Economists had predicted a 0.3% rise, but output fell 0.7% compared to October.
Now, there is an ongoing debate about why the German economy has stalled. Many believe it is because consumers are holding back due to inflation and rising prices. Others say it is a result of a fall in construction and house building activity. But before we get into that, here are a few historical facts to point out to make sure we are on the same page. Germany as it is now is the result of the German reunification of 1990. The unification merged West Germany, the Federal Republic of Germany, and East Germany, the former German Democratic Republic. While the former was a successful capitalist economy with a developed welfare state, the latter was a socialist planned economy with a relatively low income and productivity levels and strong dependence on other socialist countries. Meanwhile, the East German economy collapsed when it adopted West Germany's Deutschmark currency. Due to an overvalued exchange rate, a rapid rise in wages beyond productivity, and the disruption of traditional trade flows. In due course, West Germany had to finance about half of the consumption in East Germany, about 100 billion euros a year or 8% of GDP, through transfer payments, thereby putting a heavy burden on the social security system. The second historic change was the establishment of the European Monetary Union and the introduction of the euro in 1999. As a result, Germany lost control of its monetary policy and was subject to an interest rate chosen by the European Central Bank. Some economists argued that Germany had entered the European Monetary Union at an overvalued exchange rate of 1.96 Deutschmark, resulting in a loss of competitiveness. Presently, the German economy is highly trade-orientated and therefore sensitive to international events that weaken foreign demand. Shipping disruptions in the Red Sea and escalating tension in the Middle East could further cloud the trade outlook. Like the rest of the German economy, exports remain stuck in the twilight zone between recession and stagnation, said Carsten Brzezinski, global head of macro at ING. Meanwhile, the government suffered a huge blow in November last year when Germany's top court threw out its 2024 budget plans, forcing divisive political wrangling over how to fill a 17 billion euro or $18.6 billion funding gap. The government's plans relied heavily on using this money in the coming years, and the court's decision created a giant hole in the budget. You would think that Parliament could simply approve new loans. This time not for COVID measures, but for the energy transition and other purposes. But Germany's debt brake won't allow this. The fiscal rule added to the constitution in 2009 forces the government to keep its books balanced and strictly limits new borrowing. Approving additional debt of 60 billion euros had only been allowed by declaring the pandemic an emergency, which in turn made it possible to temporarily suspend the debt brake. It's quite interesting that net zero goals are increasingly taking a back seat, following the German government's sudden finding of a shortfall of the aforementioned 60 billion euros for its green transition goals, due to the recent budget crisis and spending freeze. Meanwhile, long-term structural problems surrounding Germany's workforce and infrastructure also remain unresolved. We will tell you more about this shortly. Meanwhile, the International Monetary Fund predicts Germany will be the only G7 economy that shrank in 2023 and at 0.9%. Growth is expected to remain well below the average of 1.4% for advanced economies in 2024. That said, let's go back to where we left off earlier. We've already mentioned that one of the reasons why Germany's economy did not do well last year was because it struggled with how expensive energy was. This implies that energy-intensive industries must pay higher natural gas prices after losing Russia's cheap supply following its invasion of Ukraine, and burst a bunch of inflation deterred consumers from spending. Even at present, macroeconomic production capacity will likely not return to normal levels of utilization until 2025. Until then, the output gap will not be due to any lack of demand. It will primarily be a result of supply disruptions, especially with regard to energy. This has made energy-intensive industries cut back production and is likely to scale it back even further. Although Germany's current coalition government has come up with price packages to help support manufacturing industries with energy bills, the long-term effectiveness of these measures are still to be seen. On the whole, however, industry is likely to remain fairly unscathed through the winter. Although new orders have fallen sharply since the beginning of the year, order books are still well filled. In addition, some industrial sectors will benefit from easing tensions in global supply chains. This could mitigate the downward pressure on exports stemming from the reduced competitiveness and weakening foreign demand caused by high energy costs. Anyway, speaking of inflation, households in Germany will be confronted with a decline in the purchasing power of their incomes due to high inflation and will therefore reduce their consumption expenditure. This will affect retailers and other consumption-related service providers. As in many other sectors, these will themselves be burdened by the high costs of energy. A sharp year-on-year fall in energy prices has caused the rise in consumer prices to fall from 8.7% year-on-year in January 2023 to 3.7% most recently. Furthermore, price increases for food, 4.6%, and goods, excluding energy, 3.9%, have slowed. In contrast, strong wage increases could lead to further price rises, particularly for services, but also government fees, etc., meaning that core inflation should still average around 3% this year. Earlier on, we mentioned that Germany, like other industrialized countries around the world, is facing deep labor shortages, particularly in skilled high-growth sectors. Official estimates suggest Germany's aging society will be short of 7 million skilled workers by 2035. The government aims to foster immigration from countries outside the EU to plug labor shortages. Despite the reform of immigration and citizenship laws in 2023, experts caution that progress may be slow, noting parts of Germany's administrative machinery is already creaking under a big backlog of existing citizenship applications. Meanwhile, rising unemployment figures of just under 20,000 per month have recently caused the unemployment rate to rise to 5.9%. This slight weakening trend could continue at least until the middle of the year. Another area that is a source of problems is the downturn of the construction sector. This has dampened investment by elevated uncertainty and higher financing costs. Although investment in equipment has increased by 3% in 2023, this was almost exclusively due to a sharp rise in commercial vehicle registrations, which was driven by tax breaks for electric cars available until the end of September. Investments in other machinery and equipment virtually stagnated. In view of weak demand and the subdued mood in the economy, this is unlikely to change much for the time being. Last year's rise in interest rates will probably initially further exacerbate the recession in residential construction. Germany is also facing the fallout of ongoing farmer protests, as with many other parts of Europe, due to farmers protesting against agricultural diesel being rolled back. Strikes are being seen in other sectors too, such as the airline sector. Germany's national carrier, Lufthansa, has had to cancel 80 to 90% of its flights from the 18th of February evening to the 21st of February morning due to a number of ground staff walking out. This has mainly affected Frankfurt, Berlin, Munich, Cologne, Hamburg, Stuttgart, and Düsseldorf. However, the Landesbank believes that a recession, if happening, should be quite shallow, with the German economy hopefully recovering without too much long-term damage.